Winston had never hurt anyone in his life, but you wouldn't have known that from the way people reacted when they saw his face. His eyes were the first thing anyone noticed, a deep, burning copper that seemed to track every movement in the room, narrow just enough to look like he was constantly displeased. His brow never softened, his mouth never curved upward. Even when he was perfectly relaxed, sprawled across a sunny windowsill with his paws tucked beneath him, he looked like he was personally offended by the weather. His thick, smoke-gray coat puffed out around his face like a permanent mane, and his sharp little ear tufts gave him the bearing of a small, irritated lion who had wandered in expecting better treatment. At the shelter, the staff called him the judge. Visitors would walk past his enclosure, pause, meet that unflinching copper stare, and keep walking. Nobody wanted to adopt a cat who looked like he was already disappointed in them. One family got as far as filling out an application before the father caught Winston's stare through the glass and quietly suggested they think about it a little longer. They never came back. "He's not actually mean," one volunteer tried to explain to a couple who'd backed away after Winston merely blinked at their toddler. "That's just his face." But explanations didn't matter much against a stare like that. Weeks turned into months. Other cats came and went. Kittens scooped up within days. A three-legged tabby adopted within a week. Even a one-eyed senior cat found a home before Winston did. He sat in his enclosure, perfectly still, watching the world walk past him with that same heavy, unreadable expression, as if he even cared it nobody could tell. 3 months passed, then 4. The staff started to wonder if he would ever find someone willing to look past that face. Claire noticed him on a Tuesday, mostly by accident. She'd come to the shelter to look at a litter of kittens for her sister, and Winston's enclosure happened to be on the way. She almost walked past him too, until he did something strange. As she passed, he reached one paw very slowly through the bars, not quite far enough to touch her, and held it there. Just held it there. Copper eyes fixed at her, paw outstretched, as if he were asking a question he didn't have the words for. She crouched down. "Hi," she said. "Rough day?" Winston blinked, slowly, deliberately, the closest thing to a smile his face seemed able to produce. Claire stayed for almost an hour, sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of his enclosure, while the kittens she'd come to see were forgotten entirely. A staff member eventually wandered over and, half-joking, asked if she wanted to know the judge's real name. She did. It was Winston. She adopted him 3 days later, signing the paperwork while the same volunteer who'd warned other families away quietly told her, "I think he's been waiting for someone who wouldn't be scared off." The ride home set the tone for everything that followed. Winston, who was not a small cat, had been wedged into a pink and black carrier that was clearly built with someone else's pet in mind, a carrier Claire had borrowed in a hurry and would later admit was comically too small. He didn't complain. He didn't yowl or scratch at the mesh. He simply sat there, folded into a shape that should have been uncomfortable, staring out at the passing world with the exact same stern, unbothered expression he wore for everything else in his life, as though being stuffed into an undersized pink bag was simply one more indignity to be endured in silence. Claire laughed so hard she had to pull over. At home, Winston explored the apartment in total silence, sniffing corners, inspecting the couch, sitting in doorways like a tiny gray sentry. He didn't hide under the bed like nervous cats often do. He didn't dart away when Claire reached out to pet him. He simply allowed it, sat very still, and watched her with that same heavy, unreadable stare, as if he were still deciding whether she'd passed some sort of test. That first night, he chose to sleep at the foot of the bed instead of beside her, a careful, deliberate distance that felt like a statement. For the first week, Claire genuinely wondered if she'd adopted a cat who simply didn't like her. He never sought her out, he never climbed into her lap, he observed from a distance like a house guest who hadn't quite decided whether he was staying. Her sister teased her about it constantly. "Are you sure he doesn't just hate you?" she'd ask, only half joking, every time she came by and watched Winston stare at both of them from across the room without so much as a blink. Then, on a quiet Sunday morning, everything changed. Claire was reading on the couch when she heard a soft, rhythmic sound from across the room, a sound she didn't recognize at first. She looked over and found Winston mid-bath, one back leg hiked up at an undignified angle, grooming himself with total unself-conscious focus. And there, in the middle of his serious, scowling face, was his small pink tongue sticking straight out, completely forgotten between licks. He looked, for the first time since she'd met him, ridiculous. Claire didn't move. She didn't want to break whatever spell had let his guard down. She just watched as the cat who had stared down an entire shelter full of strangers sat there with his tongue out, utterly unaware, utterly unbothered, utterly himself. It was such a small thing, but it cracked something open. From that morning on, Winston was a different cat, or maybe he'd been this cat all along and Claire simply hadn't been allowed to see it yet. He started waiting by the door when she came home. He started headbutting her hand when she stopped petting him too soon. Within a week, he'd abandoned his spot at the foot of the bed entirely, choosing instead to sleep pressed against her side, tongue occasionally still poking out mid-dream, as though some part of him had finally relaxed enough to stop performing seriousness even in his sleep. His face never changed. The scowl stayed, the copper stare stayed sharp and unreadable to anyone who didn't know him. Strangers who met him still occasionally took a step back, and delivery drivers learned to knock instead of just walking in. But Claire knew better now. She'd seen what was underneath, the soft, silly, deeply affectionate cat who simply happened to have the most intimidating resting face of any animal she'd ever met. Her sister, the same one who'd once asked if Winston hated her, came by a month later and found him asleep across Claire's lap, paws twitching, tongue half visible. She stood in the doorway for a long moment just looking at him. "I take it back," she finally said. "I take all of it back." "People judge him before he's even done anything," Claire told her, watching Winston nap with his tongue half out and one paw twitching. "And he just lets them. He doesn't even try to convince them otherwise." Maybe that was the most remarkable part. Winston never performed friendliness for an audience. He never softened his expression to win anyone over. He simply was who he was, fierce-looking, quiet, unapologetically himself, and waited with apparent patience for the few people willing to look closer. Those who did were rewarded with something most people never got to see, a cat whose gentleness wasn't an act, wasn't a performance, wasn't something he turned on for visitors. It was simply who he was underneath a face the world had decided to misread. Winston still looks furious in every single photo. He still makes new guests pause at the doorway, and he still gets the occasional nervous glance from the mail carrier. But anyone who has spent more than a week in his company will tell you the truth. That scowl is just a mask, and underneath is one of the gentlest, most affectionate cats they've ever known. Sometimes the fiercest faces are hiding the softest, gentlest hearts at all. You just have to be patient enough and brave enough to stick around long enough to catch them off guard.